is what I need to do.
Okay.
Tonight, Dr. Janet Kübler of the CSUN Biology Department will introduce us to the world of California seaweeds. Dr. Kübler received her Ph.D. in biological sciences from the University of Maine. Currently, she is involved in research on the ecological importance of seaweeds and algae and has been doing that work for more than 20 years. So welcome, Janet Kübler.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be at a meeting, especially because I'm not going to talk about plants very much, a little bit, and I'm talking about things that are plant-like, and trying to weave together the ways that they are more and less plant-like than we might think at first. Um, so thank you again. And let's start with this image here. If we think about seaweeds in California, we see these, we think about the kelp forest probably first because this is what we see even when the tide is in from the land. We don't see it from underneath like this necessarily, but we see the kelp on the surface. And we know that they're really large canopy forming kelps like this Nereocystis leucana that we see here, that it makes the habitat for other things to live there, right? That in the same way that trees make the habitat on
Could I
land.
interrupt just really quickly?
Yeah.
You're not in like slideshow mode right now. So you're only at the beginning
No?
screen for us.
Oh,
So just to
no.
know, I'm at a screen that
Oh,
just shows microalgae, your intro screen, and it didn't go to slideshow yet. So
okay.
I'm
That is odd because
you did you go to slideshow?
I
Just
did. Um,
that's what I'm seeing. I don't know about anybody else. So
back. Um,
That's also what I'm seeing.
okay,
all
thanks.
right, let me stop the
Feature,
share
it
and
says
start
animations, not
again.
slideshow.
Yes, did you do slideshow?
Let's see.
We'll get it straightened out. The
Yeah.
better now too. There. You're at the first intro screen.
Okay. And let's see. We go like so. You move.
Yep.
Okay.
Now we're at kelp forest.
Okay. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for stopping that because it looks exactly the same on my screen as it did before. So, okay. So here we are in the kelp forest. We are up in central or northern California because this is a forest of Nereocystis leucana or bull kelp. And the bull kelp are defining the habitat in the same way that plants make the plant community defines the habitat for other organisms. Um, and it's easy to think about and identify the big kelps in the kelp forest, but there are also, if you see in the bottom right, microscopic seaweeds and seaweeds that are just a little more than microscopic that are just, so that we can identify them, but we can see them a little better when we have some magnification, right? Like this little red seaweed on the side here. Um, and that helps us know what we're talking about, right? That the seaweeds are the algae that are big enough to be seen without magnification, right? So the microalgae are the ones that we need my magnification to discern. Um, so moving on. So in that kelp forest or in that isolated small piece of seaweed, we can easily tell what species are there. This is more typically what we see when we go to the shore at low tide. lot of different species all mixed together, different amounts kind of collapse down on each other because they're, the water is gone. This green here is the Phyllospatix, which is an angiosperm. So not a seaweed, because the seaweed are all the algae that are big enough to see. And the algae are all the things that do photosynthesis that are not true plants. Okay, so in this view, there are probably 40 different seaweed species. If you were to go through and look for all the small ones and look in the corners and things like that. The total seaweed flora of California is more than 700 species. And unlike the land flora, they are not, there's not very much endemism. Maybe 14-15% of the species are endemic to California. The marine boundaries are not as strong as the land boundaries for dispersal at the ends of the state, right? As they are, say, going over the Sierras or crossing rivers. Okay. There are lots of different forms of the seaweed. So you see here on the left again is the surf grass, which is a true plant. And then we see a lot of seaweeds in this image. Some of them have the form of just being sort of thick film on the rocks, but it is, if you take a cross section, you can see the rows of cells and layers and structures and reproductive structures in there. Some are calcareous and branched and standing up even when the water is out. Other ones are branched and flat. So lots and lots of different forms. And then there are lots of different colors. So on the right, we see, even though all the seaweeds in this picture are about the same size, they're all about 10 to 20 centimeters long and all sort of flat blades, but we see that some of them are this golden brown color, much like the one behind me also, that is characteristic of the Phaeophyta, the brown algae, or especially on the kelp part of the brown algae. There are some that are bright orangey red and some that are bright green. And those colors correspond to the accessory pigments they have, which are characteristic of the groups they're in. And just as on land, what plants you have in the flora determine, what the sort of shape of the landscape is for other organisms. So it is for the seaweeds at low tide and at high tide, right when they're covered with water. You see this on the left, this bench is covered with a carpet of about 3 different species, 2 kinds of red algae, which are hard to distinguish, admittedly, in this image, and 1 kind of chlorophyte, green alga. But it's a very low turf and only provides habitat for things that are small. On the right of your screen, you see one of the really common and abundant kelps of California. Actually, it has a range that goes well up into the Pacific Northwest called Egregia menziesii, or the feather boa kelp. And this one, I love the story that it is the one, as Lewis and Clark made their way across the country on their expedition, collecting plants all along the way and making their herbarium, they got to the Oregon, to the Pacific Ocean, and they collected one seaweed, and it was Egregia menziesii. And that sample is still in their collection in Philadelphia. Now we get to one sciencey graph, right, which is no longer the beautiful seaweeds, but it's important for understanding where we are here. So this is a eukaryotic tree of life, and if you are my age or older, you learned that the kingdoms of life were in school. You learned that the kingdoms of life were animals, plants, fungi, and everything else, which was in this sort of grab bag called protists. And that is not defined very well. And that was really based on their gross morphology and our understanding of it then. But as we have much more genetic information and we can better trace the real relationships of organisms with each other, we end up with a tree that looks more like this. So we still have the plants here and the animals and fungi here. And then we have, some things we're also familiar with, like slime molds and amoebae. And then a lot of other groups that were, previously lumped in to this mega group, the protists. But we now understand them to be genetically very distantly related to each other. Now, I have put in bold any group that has algae in it, that has any eukaryotic photosynthesizing organisms that are not plants, right? So almost every group, except for the animals, fungi, and slime molds, every large group has some algae in it. So it has some things that do photosynthesis. And the things that are the macroalgae, the macroscopic algae, are over here in the stramenopiles. We have the brown algae, right, closely related to diatoms, and not at all closely related to land plants. We also have red algae and a couple of different clades of green algae. So the red and green algae are in this big group of Plantae sensu broadly described Plantae. And then these would be the Viridid Plantae within that group, and the reds and greens also in there. So jumping out to the browns and just talking about them for a minute. All right, here is a characteristic brown seaweed from the coast of California. This is Postalcia palmiformis. It looks like little cute rubbery palm trees on the shore. They have the main characteristics of a kelp, that they have the fronds that do photosynthesis, and they are held up toward the light by stipe, and then they have this structure at the bottom called a holdfast, which is really just what it says. It's just there to hold it to the substrate. It doesn't have any of the function of roots. Like, it's not bringing any nutrients or anything up from the bottom into the rest of the organism. In fact, most of the exchange of nutrients in and oxygen out is happening at the fronds, directly with the seawater, or a lot of photosynthesis happening in the air when they're still damp on the surface. Okay, so that's one brown alga, and it's again repeated here in the middle here. And here's some diversity of the brown algae, or the Phaeophyceae, and they are can see that they're not all the same color, and they're not even all brown. That some groups of the brown algae, like Fucales, which we also commonly call rockweeds, are kind of olive green, but they do have some of the brown accessory pigments. Some, like this Dictyota, are more yellow with a blue iridescence, so an overall kind of green effect. Some are very dark brown. Some are filamentous and small and largely transparent. And some, like the giant kelp, have this golden brown color, and that we associate with kelps. The giant kelp is probably the most iconic of California seaweeds because it is so abundant in the kelp forests, and it having floats at the base of every, the base of every frond right here. The whole thing floats. If it becomes detached or broken, floats up on the beach, and you see tons of this piled up on the beach, and it's much played with, right? If you can pop the floats or play jump rope. So, and it wraps around your ankles and pretends to be a sea monster. So it is probably the most familiar seaweed to anybody in California. Now, jumping back to this diagram, let's look now over here at the red algae, which diverged, from the land plants a little earlier than the green algae. And here is a particularly beautiful frond of red algae. They have more delicate structures than the brown algae because of the way their cells divide, which is a long story. But you can see they have a wide variety of structures, from finely branched, intricate, beautiful structures that are relatively solid. These are finely branched hollow tubes. This is a string of single cells in one filament. There are a lot of red seaweeds that are flat blades of various thicknesses and opacities and transparencies. A lot of red seaweeds in California are a little upright branched form of, the sort of 10 to 15 centimeters long side. This one here is called Holosacian glandiforme because its whole body is made of hollow sacs that look like glands and that are filled with seawater. And the photosynthesis happens all over the outside of that. Some red algae are also encrusting form, like we see here. And jumping from that one to this, a lot of the red algae or rhodophyte cell walls have interesting things going on, where they maybe have calcium carbonate embedded in the walls, which makes them crusty, and they can be like this lithothamnion here. They can have different textures, which are characteristic of the species. Some of them have branched uprights that come from a base, and some just their whole lives are this encrusting form. And you probably have seen them on shells and things and maybe not realized, oh, that's a photosynthetic thing. Many of the fleshy red algae have protein cuticles on the outside that refract light and make them iridescent. And there isn't really a good story for what that's useful for them for, but it does make them beautiful. This one, Mosaiella splendens, can be up to a half meter in size and is very dark purple color with blue iridescence all the time. Some have seasonal iridescence or iridescence in some stages of the life cycle and not others. Okay, and then finally the green algae, right? They're most like the plants, right? They feel most familiar. They have that chlorophyll A and B color. right, that we associate with plants. This one here is Ulva, is the genus. It's a very speciose genus. It has, but it has relatively few morphological characters. We pretty much can't identify species without genetic help, because every individual is a sheet with different amounts of ruffling or twisting that we used to use to try and identify different species, or holes on the surface. But, turns out none of the morphological characters are good. And all of the ulvas are sheets of 2 cells thick and of various roughlinesses. Other green algae or chlorophyta have other forms. There are some that are encrusting like this. There are some very simple unbranched filaments. A lot of the more filamentous green algae live in the freshwater. Most of the green algae are little tolerant of brackish to freshwater, live kind of more in the fringes. Some are branched filaments that really wrap up together. This one is called spongiomorphum because the filaments get so tangled together. This one in the lower left, that it makes a sort of spongy structure that's sort of spread out here for the photo. Here in the middle is another ulva, and then over here in the upper right are a couple of tropical species that I put in because they illustrate something interesting, and that is that some green algae have giant cells, like individual really big cells. Like this acetabularia has a single cell for the whole stalk. And this halimeda is a siphonous or cenocytic alga, meaning that it doesn't have any cross walls inside. That it only makes cross walls when it's making reproductive cells. So it replicates its chloroplasts and its nuclei and everything it needs to live, inside its cells, but inside the organism, everything is loose, and that makes them really attractive for some kinds of sea slugs to eat, because essentially they can bite them and suck out a great amount of sap out of the middle, which is not restricted by cell walls. So the green algae are most like the land plants, but also not. So these 700 different species of seaweed that we have in California, what do we do with them? How do we interact with them? Well, first, starting on the left to right, first thing we do is appreciate them, right? We appreciate them and study them. This is Dr. Kathy Ann Miller from Jepson Herbarium, and enjoying some seaweed and teaching people about it, just like we are here. And in the middle panel, we have some artwork that's made inspired by seaweeds. So the seaweeds, bring us to do just like plants, to be creative in the world and try to explain the beauty of the world to other people through art. And then on the right, we have a group of people who are working on, they are actually the staff. This is this woman here with the sneaker. This one is the CEO of a seaweed plastic company based in Berkeley that makes plastic for packaging, and is slowly replacing plastic film with seaweed biodegradable plastic film made of seaweed. And that company is called Sway. So we use the seaweeds for all these things. We grow some in aquaculture. So these are some that I've been involved with. This is Laminaria farlowii that we had growing on some ropes, which is a common aquaculture practice, with the goal of feeding them to abalone. This one in the middle is Chondrochanthus corymbiferus, which is sometimes called the Turkish towel, and it's the largest of the red seaweeds. When it grows full size, it can be half a meter across. And then here are some of the tanks. Oh, and this one is used is grown for use in cosmetics. And then there are some of the tanks that we used to grow the seaweeds at the cultured abalone farm. So all of this is from the cultured abalone farm in Goleta, which is just north of Santa Barbara. And you can do a farm tour there if you're interested in seeing how they grow the seaweed there and how they grow the abalone. And they also do farm to table dinners, which I understand are very nice. So I wanted to now switch to some more specific examples of how, well, focusing first on this question of like, how do we get more? Why is the number of species growing, right? The number of species of seaweeds in California was about little more than 650 when I was first learning them, and now it's over 700. And we pretty much, get new species by learning more about what's already here and finding that there are multiple species, and by range shifts, things shifting into the area, and by introductions and invasions. So this particular species, one of my favorites, because it does a lot of different things in one species or one species complex. So this is Mastocarpus papillatus, and it has heteromorphic alternation of generations, meaning it alternates between an encrusting form and an upright form, depending on whether it's haploid or diploid. That the haploid gametophyte forms are upright, like little fronds, and the tetrasporophyte phase is encrusting. And this is a common species complex in California. It has a distribution from Baja up to the Aleutians. And in the 1970s and 1980s, some scientists in California collected samples from all over that species range and did crosses in the lab and found they are all potentially interfertile with each other. So they said, one species, right? One species. And then in about just the early 2000s, another scientist now armed with genetic tools and thinking that species and individuals at the two ends of this spectrum of distribution would never encounter each other and probably are not actually all interbreeding with each other. So took samples over the range again and sequenced them, and then found from their genetic divergence 11 different species. So there are 11 different species described in the literature. This species also has, besides this interesting alternation of generations and having male and female gametophytes, you can see illustrated here that the males are smooth and the females are bumpy, because if you remember the life cycles of the red seaweeds, they have when they're first, the oogonia are first fertilized, that they grow for a while as a diploid organism on the parental female gametophyte, and all these little bumps are those carposporophytes. So they really have 3 stages in their life cycle. But there are also many Mastocarpus papillatus that are parthenogenic, that that instead of carpet spores alternating and growing up to be those tetrasporophytes, they just cycle back to things that look like female gametophytes, but don't do sexual reproduction. Right? They don't go through the sexual side of the life cycle. So about 10 years ago, another group of scientists said, well, okay, let's just sample the ones that we know are sexually reproducing and sequence those. So they collected tetrasporophytes from the range of the initial species or the 11 new species, and looking just at the ones that do sexual reproduction, they found 7 species. So there are either 1, 11, or 7 species of Mastocarpus papillatus. My money's on 7. Depending on how you deal with ones that are asexually reproducing parthenogenically. So, but that is one of the ways that we get more species, right? That we find out more about the species that we have and find cryptic divergence and find that while they look the same to us, they are different species to themselves. So that's one of the ways that we get more species. Another way that we get more species is by range shifts. So I still want to continue a little bit my story of Mastocarpus papillatus. So here is Mastocarpus papillatus here and here. Some of the other things in this picture are different, like this and this, different red algal species, but focusing on this one and this one. The parthenogenetic females look just like the sexual females, and you can't tell them apart morphologically, though it turns out that they have a different number of copies of their genome when you but we can't see that offhand. And just like some land plants, they have geographic parthenogenesis. So the further north you go in the distribution, the more likely an individual is to be asexual, and the further south you go, the more likely they are to be sexual. And the zone where they cross over, where it's like equally likely to be either one, to be sexual or asexual, is in Central California. So it's part of the coast here, blown out from this little mini map of California between Monterey Bay and Point Conception. This is an area where it transitions between for this species complex for being more likely to be asexual in the north and sexual in the south. It's a place where the temperature, the range, the local conditions matter a lot to this species and which way it's reproducing. And this is also the most common area in California where species either have their southern limit of a northern temperate distribution or the northern limit of a southern temperate distribution. So it's a very important area for lots of seaweed species. So seaweed, as it warms up, besides having a negative effect on the big brown algae like the Nereocystis I showed you at the beginning, or the giant kelp I have behind me, warm water temperature is particularly bad for the really massive seaweeds, that it affects them first. For lots of species and also for subpopulations within species, as the temperature changes, the range shifts. And lots of the increasing number of seaweeds in California are things that have moved up from south of the border into California. as the water becomes consistently warmer on average. So those are two ways that we get more species. Another way is that we have introductions and invasions of species. So this is an introduced species to California, Undaria pinnatifida. It's also called wakame. It is prized for human consumption, cultivated for human consumption in Asia. It's beautiful, has this beautiful rough leaf fronds that are kind of lobed on the edges, and this sort of crinkly texture of the fronds that you see on the left. And on the right, you see its sporophyll, which is the part of its anatomy that makes its spores. And this is at the bottom of the stipe, which is broken off in this example here because I think these were to be pressed and this is too thick to press. But if you ever see a kelp with this big ruffly structure at the bottom in California, it's going to be Undaria pinnatifida. So it's introduced, it's not very invasive, it's slowly spreading, mostly from harbors out. You can easily find it in LA harbor, and some of the harbors in Orange County. And scientists are monitoring it. It doesn't seem to be causing a big problem. But it is a species that wasn't there before, that's introduced. A species that's introduced and very invasive and a problem in California is Caulerpa taxifolia. And in this image, we see this fleshy green alga here that is growing on the edge of and sort of taking over this eelgrass bed. Eelgrass, very important for maintaining biodiversity in subtidal soft bottom places. And Caulerpa taxifolia grows over. It's had disastrous effects on ecosystems in other parts of the world, like the Mediterranean. And this species and Caulerpa prolifera have been a related thing that is also quite invasive, have been found in harbors in Southern California, and a lot of effort has been made in the past 15 years to eradicate them as best as possible. But these are things that if the frond breaks, it can if it fragments while you're pulling it out, right, it can reattach and continue growing again, which I know is a problem that you also have with land plants. It also has runners. So you might think that you've removed the plant, but it can just sprout up again. So the Caulerpa species are an invasive problem. And because of that, since 2024, it has become illegal to have anything in the genus Caulerpa in your possession in California. They are kind of popular saltwater aquarium plants. They are sold widely for aquaria. The disastrous invasion of Caulerpa in the Mediterranean was from a commercial aquarium, like for tourists, that accidentally lets them go. This little picture over here on the left is a different Caulerpa species, still illegal, Caulerpa lentilifera, which is very beautiful and grown and sold for human food, for garnishing, and for food or drinks. It is very nice to eat because it has little bubbles of salty water that pop in your teeth. But you may not have it in California, and because they are so invasive. And that is the only really strong enforcement that I know of for invasive seaweeds in California. Actually, it's only really strong. restriction, but it's not, I don't think, very well enforced, actually. But we have native species that replace those species, or maybe even are better than them. So we have California's native sea grapes, which is shown here in a sort of less pristine presentation than the one for the ad that I showed you. But these are Botryocladia pseudodichotoma. They are a red seaweed, not a green seaweed like the one I just showed you, but they are little bubbles of photosynthetic tissue on little branches that are filled with salty water, and they are shiny and beautiful and translucent and delicate in the same way as the green sea grapes. And you can find them at very low tides right on the coast here. We found some last week, 2 weeks ago, with my class from CSUN. And then on the right, we have Alaria marginata, which is related to the Undaria pinnatifida, but it is a native species, and it's also eaten by people and grown and also called wakame in the market. So it's these are native things that people can grow instead or have instead of those introduced species. Oh, I want to say one more thing about that before I leave that. So how do we know that there are more introductions, that there are more species because of introduction? So if you look back to 2004, in the Fremontia newsletter, there was a special edition about seaweeds, and in those articles in Fremontia in 2004, they mentioned specifically that there were 12 non-native species of seaweed in California. It's it has been well surveyed. I don't think we're getting very many previously undiscovered seaweeds. There were 12 non-native species in 2004, and now 22 years later, there are 36 non-native species recorded in California. And then I'm going to jump to this. So if you want to know more about all these things, there are a couple of websites I recommend. The first one, which you're probably already familiar with, is the University of California, Berkeley and Jepson Herbarium, which has phycological resources and a section of algal nomenclature. They have a big collection of macroalgae. And it's a great resource here in California. And then the second website is AlgaeBase. AlgaeBase is the global resource for really systematic and taxonomic information of seaweeds, but also their distribution. You can search by taxa, you can search for images, you can search by common names. Very few seaweeds have common names, but the few common names they use are often reused for other species. Like there are at least 3 things called bull kelp, for example, that I know of, that I've seen, that are entirely different and not even closely related to each other. One of them is not even a kelp, it's a fucoid. But in any case, AlgaeBase is the place to find authoritative information about seaweed names and distributions and histories of naming that organism over time, which we all know is so important when you try to get in the scientific literature. Another thing you can do is get a guide. There are not that many great guides specific to California, but this one was just produced this year. It's one of these these fold out page things, right? Called Southern California Seaweed Field Guide, Learn to Identify 24 Common Species. And this was published by California Sea Grant and California Seaweed Festival, after being written by Dr. Adi Ken at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And she's going to also, well, the whole consortium is going to also do a Northern California seaweed field guide like this, because, as I said, the flora in Southern California and Northern California are significantly different from each other with that overlap zone in the Central Coast. And then another way that you can find out more about seaweeds is to follow them on social media. So these are examples of the first page of the Seaweed of the Week. There's a, which is a program of the California Seaweed Festival on Instagram. So every week on Instagram's posted 4 pages about one species of seaweed, with some information about, what makes it interesting, what its name is, and where you can find it, and some of its structure, multiple pictures, and that's in English and in Spanish every week. And if we do this, if it goes on every week, we can do this for more than 10 years because there are that many seaweed species in California. So, right, if you go to the California Seaweed Festival, any of their social media channels, you'll see Seaweed of the Week that comes on Instagram first, and then it gets fed to other social media channels, platforms. That's what we're supposed to call them, social media platforms. And then if you really want to know more, and you really want to get involved and play with some seaweed and eat some seaweed and drink some seaweed beverages and get your hands on some things and talk to some entrepreneurs who are doing businesses with seaweeds, then you want to come to the California Seaweed Festival, which is a weekend event, happens once a year somewhere on the coast of California. This year, it's going to be October 24th in Old Custom House Plaza in Monterey. And you can get on the mailing list here at their website. And I just want to say that it's the seaweed people have a big tent, and they're very welcoming, and they are really happy to talk about seaweed anytime, and like to think about the overlaps between land plants and photosynthesizers in the sea. And that's all I have to say. I'm going to open to the questions. Stop my shit.
Thank you, Janet. I have at least 3 questions that came through on the chat.
Oh, good.
One was a comment. Would you, it's a little longer than this, but I'll try to synthesize it. Is it true that really omega-3, that thing that we take in fish oil and stuff, is really not a product of fish, but from a seaweed that the fish are eating?
It's from the microalgae, microscopic algae
Okay.
that the fish are, small fish are eating, and bigger fish are eating those fish. But most of the photosynthesis in the ocean, like half of the photosynthesis on the planet, is done by the microscopic algae in the sunlit surface of the vast ocean, right? Most of the surface of the ocean. And yes, so that's true. It's not from the seaweeds, though. It's from the microalgae, and it does get passed up the food web.
So when we are taking fish oil tablets to get omega vitamins, that's really the kelp seaweed that are the origins of that?
Yeah, so you can get algae oil that cuts out the middle fish.
Okay, so you could go and find a different
Yeah.
product if you don't want to
Hmm.
do the fish oil way.
Yeah. And the same with, I noticed that people have started taking krill oil because krill is a new fishery. Um, but the large whales need to eat the krill. Like other things depend on the krill. Stop eating the krill. And but you can take algae oil, which is like, also the krill are getting their omega-3 fatty acids from algae.
Um,
Yes, that is what
Another
bacon is.
question was, can we do where would you get a seaweed farm tour? Did the
Oh, okay.
Seaweed Festival have like
This,
field trips?
the Seaweed Festival does have field trips, and yes, and in Monterey there is a seaweed farm called Monterey Bay Seaweeds, which is uh, it's a really interesting arrangement because it is partly a private business, and but its biggest investor and part owner is San Jose State University. So it's at based at the Marine Lab at Moss Landing.
Oh, okay.
Then they're also at Goleta, the cultured abalone farm. They have tours, and you can just go to their website and sign up for a tour. And then further way up north, in Humboldt County, Sunken Seaweed has tours, and they have volunteer days when you can come in and help with their actual operations.
Another question, why is for that particular um seaweed, why is it further north asexual? Is there a
Yeah,
reason
we don't know.
or what's going on there?
We don't know what the mechanism is. There is a hypothesis that when they're cold, they have failed or higher risk of failed meiosis. That's one hypothesis. Doesn't I don't buy it because it's just not that cold on the Central Coast to like if it, for some land plants, that's the case when that they have more asexuality in the far north where it really freezes a lot. But another hypothesis is that when there was glaciation, that they were equally common or not geographically dispersed. But when there was glaciation and the population was pushed down toward the south, that that when that pressure was relieved, the ones that didn't need to go through the whole life cycle could disperse north faster. So that's a that's a possibility, a hypothesis. We don't really know why. But to me that's a more interesting hypothesis. We don't know. But we can look for evidence of that. But first we have to look for evidence of funding to pay for that research.
Okay, and like getting somebody to care, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Do all algae essentially do C3 photosynthesis?
they kind of, not really. There are a few that do something very like C4 photosynthesis or maybe more like CAM photosynthesis, that they have a step where they fix carbon before it gets to the rubisco um, in the chloroplast. But lots of most seaweeds, 65% or more of seaweeds have some kind of active carbon uptake mechanism. So some of them have an antiport that brings charged bicarbonate. This is getting a little in the weeds, but most of the dissolved CO2 in seawater is charged. It's like bicarbonate. So it doesn't just diffuse into the cells. So lots of them have transport mechanisms to bring carbon in. So it's more like C4, but it's not the actual C4 process, except for in a few of the fucoids. Okay, I hope that without getting too in the weeds. I would love to
Um,
talk about that more. It's one of my favorite topics.
okay. Different lecture. Um, Someone wanted a comment on the kelp forest as characterized as sequoia of the seas.
Mhm. So yeah, so there is to get people to be interested in the loss of kelp forests, which have like catastrophically in Sonoma and Mendocino counties since about 2015. Um, First, there was a very warm, you might remember going to the beach and being like, oh, I could just float around in the water for, without a wetsuit on because it was so warm, right? It was one very warm year, followed by, which caused a lot of the kelp to die back everywhere in California. And then there was simultaneously a disease of uh, the sea stars, which are the predator on the sea urchins, which are the predator on the kelps. And um, so what happened was a lot of places never recovered from that warming because there were so many sea urchins. And so that was a hard thing to get people to be interested in. And so lots of clever people are like, how are we going to call attention to this? Right? It is like losing the sequoia forest on the land that we lost the kelp forest in the sea, right? It's like a giant wildfire went through, and we have like whole counties of coastline where the canopy forming kelps are missing. So they did use that analogy. They're not really like sequoias, really. I mean, they form the the habitat for other organisms. They make it suitable for lots of things to live there, but they don't live for thousands of years like sequoias, and they don't hold the same mass of fixed carbon like sequoias, right? So in some ways, they are the trees of that system, right? But they're not really like, I don't know, this is me nitpicking, right? They're not really like sequoias because the Nereocystis, the first picture I showed you, Nereocystis leucana, is an annual, right? It's really big, and it grows from its microscopic stage. It has alternation between, so do these, between a microscopic stage and that looks like tiny fuzz, or maybe you can't even see it, and the biggest seaweeds in the ocean. And um, all the kelps have this alternation of generations, but between a microscopic gametophyte phase and this big sporophyte phase. So those Nereocystis, the bull kelp, is annual. Very occasionally, some of them live through the winter into the beginning of the next year, but they never live 2 years. And so there's a lot of turnover and other things happening. Like sequoias don't turn over annually, thank goodness. But the giant kelp, this one, is which is what makes the kelp forest here in Southern California, um, is perennial, and most of the ones that are out there are between 1 and 4 years old. But they grow very fast, and they turn over a lot of their biomass even in 1 year.
Wow.
So,
Um, this is a little bit of a long comment with the question regarding the company that was making plastic
mhm.
out of plastic substitute. Um, Are they collecting it from the are they growing it? Or are they collecting it? If the shoreline line is this a problem for other organisms? Can it be over harvested? Um, and then the second part of that question was, what is the slimy but nice material on the surface? Ulva and the big fucoid algae. Hope that's correct. For those single-celled algae discs on stalks with no internal cell walls, what is the nucleus like? Unique in structure to protect it?
Multiple, they have, okay, we'll start with the last question. They have multiple nuclei. So the number of nuclei, and lots of seaweeds have multiple nuclei. So they're like proportional to this amount of cytoplasm. So they have, lots of nuclei in one cell. So some have like, a bigger nucleus with a lot of copies of the genome also. But wide variation in copy number and nucleus number. So the seaweed plastic company, there are at least 3 in California currently. That one is called Sway. There's one called Lollyware. Sway makes flexible sheets of plastic. Lollyware makes rigid plastic, like straws and containers, things that can be injection molded. And Viable Gear makes right now they make twine, they make string and twine for gardening currently, but they're working on one to replace fishing gear with like a more optimized lifetime so that it's useful as fishing gear, but it doesn't stick around forever. So Sway makes their plastic with wild collected red seaweed from outside the country that's imported, that's collected and could possibly be grown commercially in places where they grow that kind of seaweed, which is not California. So seaweed can be over harvested. There are examples of that. There are some seaweeds that were popular in Maine that were over harvested from small wild populations. When I learned phycology, everybody in the class had to make a collection of, and you probably did this too, botanists, make a collection of 100 species, from around near the marine lab where we're doing the course. And I don't have my students do that anymore. I have them do pictures, like take pictures of individuals, because for the rare species, if I had 50 students and everybody else at every college had 50 students that go out and make a collection, like you'll lose all the rare things in the places that we visit, right? There's a little bit of wild harvesting of seaweed for human food mostly in Northern California now, a little bit in Central California. Tiny family companies not in any danger of over harvesting. There was a significant big industrial harvesting of giant kelp in the past, in the early 20th century, and that bordered on over harvesting, even though the giant kelp grows very fast. And that was to produce alginate, which is now produced with supplies from other parts of the world. So yeah, humans can, if they try, over harvest anything, I think.
Is the sea urchin seaweed balance now okay? In balance, like off of Palos Verdes, did things get straightened out?
It's off Palos Verdes is much recovered. Yeah, it's much better. There are in Southern California, it recovered faster. In where it's giant kelp. In Sonoma and Mendocino counties, some places have never really recovered. There are places where people are doing active restoration, where they're either uh, bringing out like rocks with the microscopic phase of the seaweeds on them, and this is true Northern California all the way up to the San Juan Islands. People are doing restoration projects to see what works, and people are deliberately taking out urchins and bring them on land where they feed them up on things that are abundant and like locally abundant, and then sell them to restaurants. So there's a kind of a uh, omnivores uh, problem solving, right? that
Okay.
yeah,
Are are there differences between studying seaweeds in Maine and here in California?
there are many more species here than in Maine. In Maine, there are about 150 species, more recently glaciated, um, not as much. Seems like the most, well, at least of the red seaweeds that their center of diversity is on the west coast of Australia, and much more um, diverse in the Pacific than in the Atlantic.
Okay. Are are sea otters an effective control on sea urchins?
Sea otter populations are really not increasing anymore. They're kind of flat. So there was a nice, like, people were starting, to really encourage, protect the sea otters, and sea otter population was growing, and then it kind of flattened. So in some places they are, um, in some places where people are doing restoration or removing the uh, the sea urchins, by fishing them out, by essentially diving and scooping them up. Um, it's a little controversial whether they want to have more otters or not, but they don't really have a choice because there just aren't. The otter population is not growing that fast. But
Okay.
even if they want to reintroduce otters, some places they're also trying to get abalone populations back, right? That people have overfished abalone, and there were abalone diseases, and those populations are protected. The what red abalone that used to be fished is closed, so people are afraid that if they bring the otters back, that they'll preferentially eat the abalone over the urchins, because people would too.
Okay. What type of algae are commercially grown in California?
So giant kelp is grown on a experimental farm in Santa Barbara County, in federal waters offshore. There were a lot of experimental projects over the past 10 years that were funded by the Department of Energy, and those programs have ended. So there were a lot of places where people were trying to grow as much seaweed biomass as possible, with the idea that it would be converted to biofuels, um, which was funded for 10 years, is kind of not of interest to the current administration, so not funded anymore. Um, but for human food, Monterey Bay seaweed grows at least 10 different kinds of seaweed, including ulva and ulva pyropia or nori, and those red sea grapes, and just lots of other things. Cultured abalone farm grows Pacific dulse, which is Devularia mollis, and a kind of gracilaria, which is also called ogo in restaurants for the Japanese, the similar species that they have in Japan, used in restaurants in the same way. Um, So those two are commonly grown. Those two are also grown by sunken seaweed. There are a few other species grown um, on land. So mostly those are on land. There is one seaweed farm in the water in Humboldt Bay and one research farm in the water in San Diego Harbor. And then there's everything else is on land in California because there really aren't permits given to grow seaweed in the water in California till they know more about it.
Is that the reason why commercial seaweed farming is there's more of it happening abroad than here
Yes.
in California?
Yeah, state
Getting a
regulation.
permit is the problem in
Yeah. To get a lease to grow like like a trial one to just see if you want to do this. In Maine, for example, it costs a few $100s and and a year of time to get it approved. And in California, it could take 10 years and $1 million of surveys and things to get a farm approved. So the one that's been approved in the last 20 years is the offshore farm that was approved for a company from Goleta called Ocean Rainforest, which is a big company that has operations in Mexico, New Zealand, and in the North Atlantic also. So they have the ability to put that much money into uh, the permitting process. In Alaska, it's something in between. It's pretty easy. The state is very encouraging to people who want to grow seaweed farms. Connecticut also, Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, most of those states, they have seaweed farms have to come out of the water when there are other uses of the water. So they put them in the winter and they take it out in the summer when all the other boats are out doing all the other maritime activities.
do you, does anybody have questions that they want to ask in person? I think I covered Leslie just raised her hand. Leslie, you want to unmute yourself and ask? I can't hear you, Leslie. She's got her hand raised. Mm-mm.
Can't hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, great. Um, yeah, so this is a little bit different kind of a question. We're a little bit involved with space launches from Vandenberg Air Force Base, and they use huge quantities of water to capture the flames and cool it. And then the water is put in holding ponds, and I mean, some of it evaporates immediately, but they have this warm water that then they mix with runoff and other waters, and it's the new place they're proposing is fairly close to the coast. I mean, all of Vandenberg, but I'm just wondering if it runs off, it presumably is a warmer temperature than normal, and when it hits the coast and shoreline, is that going to have an effect on some of these algae seaweed species?
Very possibly. It depends how chronic it is. Like if it's just, very rarely, it depends. Really, it's a matter of scale. But this experiment's kind of been done when we had nuclear power plants that had cooling water, right? So if you remember,
Yeah.
there was one on the Central Coast and one um, South Coast that had um, cooling water drawn in from the ocean and pumped around and sent back out to the ocean. And so it made a pretty big area a few degrees warmer all the time. And it did affect the populations that lived there. It affected what diversity of seaweeds were there. The diversity was lower and slightly shifted to warmer water. Uh, kinds of species, and at least so that I know of 2 places that were surveyed for like 30 years in California and one on the East Coast that had this cooling water happening with the nuclear power plants. This, but the fresh water, it really depends on the scale, but freshwater runoff really changes things, right? Shifts toward more green algae from red and brown algae, among other things. Yeah, so it could really have an effect. Depends on how much and how much it changes the temperature and the salinity of the water.
Well, thank you. We raised the issue recently, and we'll see whether they're prepared to do more serious analysis. Again, and I'm not a scientist, so I don't really know how much is enough to make a serious effect, but hopefully they will address that.
Yeah, I think Vandenberg's has a gorgeous coastline with
Yeah.
its yeah. Well, you know that because you're working there, right? But it is the in on the coast side, on the seaweed side, it is extremely diverse right there.
Okay.
And if you can measure a difference in the salinity chronically and a degree or 2 difference in the temperature chronically, it probably has an effect.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. And they're proposing a whole new launch area in the southern part, a place called Sudden Flats that apparently was acquired to be a buffer zone, but now it would be a launch zone instead. So we're trying to raise some of the issues to have them at least address them in some fashion. But thank you.
Yeah.
Charles Miller. Charles, you have your hand raised. Do you want to unmute
Yeah,
yourself?
right. Thank you. Janet, thank you for a lovely presentation. And I'm going to preface my question by saying that I had to step away for about 15 minutes of it. So you might have covered this and I don't know. So I apologize in advance if you did. But I recently saw a presentation by Brian von Herzen of an organization called the Climate Foundation. And they are arguing with their data that the diminution of the giant kelp forest in the channel of the Channel Islands channel specifically, but in general up and down the coast, has led to reduction of the marine layer haze that we get in specifically in Ventura, LA, and Orange counties, but in general throughout California. And they're linking that as a causality or causation rather for the increase in temperatures we're seeing in March, April, May, June as a result because of the loss of the haze. They're using that as an argument to create artificial growth of giant kelp forests, specifically near the Channel Islands, to try to repopulate that area. I'm curious if you're aware of that project and curious of your take on that entire, effort.
I'm aware of the organization and have heard Brian speak at times. It seems possible because the seaweeds produce some molecules that increase clouding, like they increase haze in the air. So that seems plausible to me. I don't know if the change in the population size is sufficient to account for the change in the weather. I think really, in so many environmental questions, it does come down to warming. Like we already have this warming. And if more kelp could grow there, it would grow there. Right? Like the conditions are not like there is plenty of seed population around, and the conditions are just not that good. So there are a lot of people who are looking to add substrate so that more kelp can grow in different places where maybe there's not rocks for them to attach to and things like that. I really like seaweeds, and I think probably, the more you have, the merrier that we'll all be. Um, I think, that they do good, everything, plants, everything that does photosynthesis and takes up nitrogen from water and phosphorus from water is cleaning up after us and works with us in a complementary way. So having more of those things is really good. Um, I don't know. Yeah, the scale, I don't know about their math because you'd have to really look at it and you'd have to be a climatologist, I think. Um, but I think more kelp is good if it can grow there. And if it's just too warm now in some of the places where there used to be kelp, then putting lines, ropes, structures, probably not going to grow a lot more kelp there.
Hmm. Yvonne has her hand raised. Yvonne, you want to unmute yourself and
Hey. Yes, thank you. That was such a wonderful talk.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
when I was a student 100 years ago, I used a paramecium with was Paramecium bursaria. It had chlorella. I think it had
Uh,
chlorella in it. And I
yeah.
was wondering now, listening to your talk, are there many, many instances of intracellular algae in organisms, like red forms, green forms,
There,
whatever.
there aren't really red ones, but there are lots of green ones. So there are green sea slugs that have algae in them, and there are some annelid worms that get some green algae growing in them, um, and um, and hydra. And then the dinoflagellates, or something that's closely related to dinoflagellates, is uh, what is living in the reef building corals that give them the extra energy to make reefs. Uh, and that's what they lose when they bleach. They lose their colored algae that are brown. So I only can think of green and brown examples and not any red ones. But yes, it's really interesting. Yes, some things just keep the chloroplast for a while. Like eat the siphonous algae, like the ones where they bite it and they suck out all the sap and keep the chloroplasts. The sea slugs keep the chloroplasts in their back for as long as they last, and then they eat some more and recharge. How convenient. Yeah, the paramecium with the green balls. Yeah, it's wonderful.
so there was another question came into the chat. How sensitive is seaweed to salinity of the water? And do desalination plants in San Diego make any kind of difference to what's going on?
So I don't know about the ones in San Diego. Depends the sensitivity to salinity depends very much on the species. So the kelps are very sensitive to changes in salinity in either direction, right? Like if they are out, if the tide is out and it rains, it can like just really disrupt their tissue by just having drops of water on it, of fresh water. And
Hmm.
but lots of red algae can live in hypersaline environments where um, where it evaporates. Um, and there are uh, seaweeds that live in the Red Sea, uh, but they are ones that live especially well in high temperatures and high salinity. And I really don't know about the desalination plants. I would imagine they are supposed to not have an effect, right? They're supposed to monitor their effect. I don't I don't know. It's a good question.
Thank you. Um, I think that's all of our questions from attendees. Um, I have a little question myself. Um, there's actually a couple. Are you are you still IDing and finding new seaweeds? I I guess let's keep it to California. Let's not
So
worry
in
too much about
California,
the rest of the world.
right, the rest of the world, like there are places that are less well surveyed than California. People are more finding um, that something that they thought was one species is more species, right? That they're discovering differences between things that they saw before. And that's more common than finding something that no one's ever described before. Really, we don't see that very much. Only about 10% of the seaweeds, because they need to be in the light and they mostly need to be attached to the rocks, right? So they can only live in a certain depth range. And only about 10% of them are under the water always, right? That all of their individuals are under the water. And most of them, can be found and surveyed at extreme low tides. So they're mostly not.
Okay. And are there any restrictions for just like individuals going and gathering seaweeds for, for their own use? Um,
There, there are a couple of species that are protected, but otherwise, and I'll get to those in a minute, but generally, anyone in California can pick up 10 pounds of seaweed per day per person for your personal use. So to like put in your compost or to make, pressed arrangements of, or to cook, uh, to make salad for your whatever, if you have seaweed cultural uses. But there are the marine protected areas. There are more than 100, I think there are 124 marine protected areas on the coast of California, and many of those are no take zones, meaning you can't fish and you can't pick up seaweed there. There are two species that are regulated for harvesting. One of them is Postalcia palmiformis, the little palm tree that I showed you. That one has restriction in how it's harvested, that you can't take all that you can't cut off the whole top. You have to leave a certain length of the fronds if you're harvesting it, and so that it still reseeds where it lives. Um, and then the other one is bull kelp, which is under all this environmental stress up north. And that one has very limited harvesting.
okay.
Yeah. So go out there and get some, look at them, bring them home, figure them out, learn about
Thank you.
them. Okay.
Well, I still think I have more questions than answers about seaweed, but it made my head start exploding when you showed me all those different ones. I know how crazy it must be. Anybody else have other questions or comments? Did I forget anybody as I went through? Are we
I
okay?
have one more question.
Sure.
I'm sorry,
No,
I
no,
didn't.
fine. We're here.
So on the beach, when there's a lot of bull kelp, there's often flies. Are those flies like specific for kelp? Like up in Mono Lake, there's specific brine flies, or on the, there's specific to that area. Is there any specific relationship between the flies you find on kelp when you are walking along the beach, and or are they just generalists?
No, there are kelp flies that are specific to the rotting kelp. And there are also little crustaceans that live in the sand that are specific to the kelp beach hoppers that break down the kelp and increase the amount of nutrients leaching into the sand uh, that are specific to those places where there's lots of kelp. And that is a reason why it's sometimes controversial about raking up the kelp, that people sometimes say they want this, the town should clean up all this rotting kelp on the beach to make the beach nicer for people. But the kelp is part of the ecosystem, and it feeds the myofauna that live in the sand, between the sand grains. So it's part of the system, the rotting kelp on the beach.
And
That
it's
kind of addressed my question. I was wondering, I walk along the beach and I try to throw it back in the ocean, and then it kind of gets brushed back on the beach. So should I just leave it alone or keep throwing it back?
If they're alive, I throw them back too. I don't know.
How can I tell?
Oh, if their color is still good.
Still green?
Yeah, if they're a green one and they're green, or if they're a red one and they're nice and red and not white. Like, so the dead patches will be like white or decomposing looking.
Okay, because I see a lot of green, and I know they're kind of heavy to throw back sometimes, and it seems like the water just brings them right back ashore. All right.
Sometimes, yeah.
well, I do have, if those are annuals, the kelp are
Yeah.
annuals,
Yes.
that's a lot of biomass, and where is it going?
Good question.
It just goes, most of
It
it's
gets
going back into the ocean, right?
It's going back into the ocean.
Okay,
It's
so,
going slightly offshore, and it's eaten by the things that live on the bottom.
oh, okay, all right,
Yeah. And
okay,
it's being eaten by bacteria. Yeah.
okay. So there's people just commenting they would like
Huh?
presentations on seaweed life cycles and on cultivation,
Uh,
etc. I would encourage people to go to the Seaweed Festival
I would
in
too.
Monterey. It's on a weekend and go up there. How
Yeah,
ugly is could Monterey be in October?
right.
That would be a great, I don't know, what does it cost to register for I mean, is it
The
reasonable
Seaweed
for,
Festival,
yeah.
the main festival is free and free
See,
and open. And then there are like some workshops and things that have tickets, things that have supplies or, require more time of an instructor or something.
so I would imagine you probably have workshops on cultivation or on life cycle or kind of
Usually, like
issues.
we usually have workshops on cultivation. Life cycles are only special people appreciate life cycles. And I love that somebody wants that. It makes me very happy because the seaweeds have amazing life cycles, and really a lot of students hate them.
Well, take a class.
Take a class.
I can't imagine that we would be able to cover that complex a topic in a 45-minute presentation
Yeah.
in a Zoom meeting. But yeah, look up a class, right?
Yeah. Maybe the Seaweed Festival will make a
Well,
workshop.
thank you, Janet.
Thank
And
you for inviting me.
yes, it's
Fun.
been great. I will close the session unless anybody has a comment or a question that they want to make right now. Really, thanks everybody for their great questions and comments and for attending this evening. It's been really a great thing to do. I'll be
Okay.
in touch, Janet, okay?
Okay. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye-bye. Good night, guys.
Good night.